Thank you. First of all, Sharon wanted to come and sent me instead, and I'm so grateful, and I'm going to try to bump her off next year as well. This was fabulous. I've done family support in Georgia for 10 years before I came here, and also in Vermont, and to see all the stuff that's going on is just wonderful. So thanks so much for having me. And I just wrote down a few themes that I heard throughout everybody's work that I think are important. And that I want to see continue, and we'll support you on our end as much as we possibly can. So the first thing is the Conceptual Foundation. Everybody talked about building the language, the practices, the philosophy, the interactions, how you interact with people into the work you do on an everyday basis, reframing how people talk about their family members and talk to their family members and talk to people about their family members, like DC said. The thing that Oklahoma said about forcing people out of a value that they have held, I think is a really, it's a really telling statement, because we've told families for years, you know, this is what to do, and now we're telling them something completely different, and it's a really hard change to make. And then how you change the front door so that other options are the first things that come up and not the service option. So I think that's really important, because this is a paradigm shift. We are asking people to change their minds, and they are falling back on habit and memory and history and some sort of cognitive dissonance. 30 years ago, they were told, this is what you can do, this is what you should expect, and we're telling them, that's wrong. We have to figure out a way to tell them that it was okay what you did then, but this is what we want to do going forward. That's a difficult conversation, but it's really important. What we're seeing with the HCBS settings rule is a backlash against the stuff that you guys are working on. And James Taves, who I work with in the office, says, you know, it's amazing to him how people in the field have a herding instinct. You know, in the absence of good stuff, we kind of get everybody together and go, oh, we'll put them together, they'll be safe and happy. And and that's happening in every single state. And so you guys are the counter narrative to that, and you've got to keep it up. And something Nancy said yesterday when we were in the airport, you know, like Shelley, Nancy's changed my life in a couple of different conversations along the way. The article that was in the Atlantic the other day that I haven't even had a chance to read yet, but I understand Nancy was quoted quite regularly in the article. Or misquoted, exactly. But, yeah.
I did not say that everything after life, health, and safety is a luxury. I did not.
We need that other counter narrative out there. So she said, you know, even despite 2 hours of conversation with that person that really seemed to understand what the big picture was about this stuff, the article still came out the way it did. And she said to me, they bought the car. They bought the car. And so you guys you're going against that tide of people that already bought into a model that they think keeps people healthy and safe. And that's a huge job. Okay, the second thing is outreach. The community outreach that you guys are doing is absolutely amazing, and the best thing about it is the stuff that's outside the bubble. So as long as you keep that up, the ag people, the typical stuff that people do in the community that the DD community hasn't necessarily always reached out to, is the really important stuff. That's the sustainable stuff. That's not dependent on Medicaid funding or government funding for people with disabilities. That's the stuff everybody accesses. So you need to keep up the attention to that. Also, the multicultural populations, you guys that are dealing with Indian populations and Latino communities and Asian communities, and figuring out how to communicate with them and make them feel comfortable, and realizing that those interactions look different is really important. I really like this inside the bubble, outside the bubble thing. I mean, I'm going to kind of build that into some of the ways we talk about stuff up at ACL. The other part of that is that's how you find the parents who are not connected to the system and have not figured out where to go for help. But bringing them in through that kind of outreach, you're not connecting them to the system. You're figuring out what have they done, how have they managed. They're going to have some creative ideas. All of us that have family members with disabilities that we've been raising, we've had to be creative and try to figure out how to make things work. So you're going to learn a lot from those parents and figure out, where the sticking points were, and maybe be able to redirect what's going on instead of going into a paid service. This has a lot more limitations. The thing that Tennessee said in terms of, they had this 15-page application that ran through all the different services they offer, and they switched it to, what are you doing now? Is a really important question because of this thing that I just said. Families are doing stuff, and when you ask them, what are you doing now? They feel competent telling you, this is what I'm doing. It's more about them. They have an easier time telling you, what are you doing now? What's working? And you can build on that, and it's a much better starting question. I was looking at a couple of books that I've read in the last few years have kind of influenced how I think about a lot of things, and one of them is The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell's book. So you guys are on the just over getting up to the crest of a tipping point. So what makes something tip over into the way we do things? And one of the quotes was, when people are overwhelmed with information, see now I can't read my own handwriting. Tend to develop immunity to traditional forms of communication. So they turn, if they develop this immunity, they turn instead for advice and information to people in their lives that they respect, admire, and trust. The cure for immunity is Mavens, connectors, and salesmen. So Mavens are information specialists. Those are people that kind of like collect information, and you ask them something and they know something about that and they can connect you to that. Connectors are people specialists. So in your networks, you're building connectors. And then the salesmen are the ones that sell the idea, and they're very persuasive. So you need to break into these circles where people have these ideas about farmsteads and planned communities and autism apartments. Those are the communities you need to break into with your Mavens, connectors, and salespeople to give them a different idea. And peer-to-peer, the parent-to-parent network, the peer-to-peer conversations, that's where that stuff happens. Okay, third thing is sustainability. So what are the practices that you all are doing that are going to embed this paradigm shift? And taking time to build a conceptual foundation is a really important part of that. I mean, it's crucial because that conversation has to carry on through different generations of leadership, when staff changes, when older parents or, bring younger parents along. And the state that's embedding it in 3 different levels, and I didn't write down which state it was and I'm forgetting right now, but the fact that you're dealing with it on a policy level, on a provider level, and on a family and individual level, you've got to do horizontal and vertical integration of all this stuff. And then getting the thinking reflected in everything that you're doing, on the websites, in the contracts, in the training, in transition meetings from school, when kids are coming out of school, partners in policy making, all of those different ways that you're infusing this idea into everything that you do is what's going to keep it sustainable. And then the last thing is data. So we need data at the federal level. So yesterday, Aaron mentioned that we got this supporting families budget thing in the president's budget. And that's my first experience working on a federal budget in terms of trying to get something in the budget. And every single question that we got back from the HHS budget people and then the OMB budget people, we had to answer these questions over and over and over. Where's the evidence base? Where's the evidence base? And I'm thinking back to all the work we did over family support in the last 10 years, the projects of national significance and the 360 grants, and I'm like, we collected so much information. It's not evidence-based data in terms of the federal government. So that's what you guys need to do for me, is build an evidence base, because this isn't going to go away. We have $550 billion of unpaid caregiving in the country right now. I don't see any big attention being paid to that. It's only going to get deeper. We need evidence to show the federal government that by doing these kinds of things, building things into community, building it from the grassroots up, involving it beyond the disability community, beyond the aging community, for everybody, and having evidence that that works, that that reduces the reliance on the public system, that's the evidence that we need. So as you guys are thinking over your next 3 years of activities, you need to figure out what are the outcomes that you are aiming toward, and how are you going to collect data on those outcomes. And then you have to figure out, how we're going to use that at the federal level. I think that's it. So another quote from Malcolm Gladwell: if you want to build a fundamental change in people's belief and behavior, you need to create a community around them, and use those new beliefs, where these new beliefs can be practiced and expressed and nurtured. And that's exactly what you guys are doing. So just keep going. And thanks for having me.